Hey everyone, welcome to my book talk. So, the book I'm going to be talking about today is called When My Name Was Keoko, which is by Linda Sue Park. And it is a historical novel um, set, uh, set in the background of World War II. And more importantly, when the Japanese occupied Korea. Okay, so getting into the setting, first of all, that I just brought up a little bit. It's set in Korea. We never really get where exactly it's set. My assumption is more in the northern part due to the fact that later in their book, their uncle escapes and goes into the Manchurian mountains. So that is my assumption. It's more in the northern part of Korea. This is also before Korea was split into North and South Korea. But again, it's set during World War II and it is in the 1940s. So towards the end of when Japan was occupying Korea. Okay, so then going into characters, there's kind of two main characters of the book. There's Sun Hee Kim, she is the younger sister, and there is Tae Kim, who is the older brother. Throughout the book, it switches between both of their points of view. Usually it alternates most of the time. And so Sung Hee means girl of brightness, and Taeyol means great warmth. Another important character in the book is their friend Tomo, who his name means friend, and he is also a Japanese boy. Then other important characters would be their uncle, who is unnamed, and then their father and their mother, which is Abuhi and Omoni. And then we should discuss their names when they are changed. So obviously the book is called When My Name Was Kyoko, and Keoko is the Japanese name Sun-hee has to take. So they changed their family name of Kim to Kaneyama, which reflects their old last name Kim. And it essentially means like Gold Mountains, which calls back to their old Korean family name. And then Sun-hee takes the name Kyoko, and Taeyol takes the name Nobu. Okay, so I'm gonna get into some plot points of the book. So it sets up, obviously, Japanese occupation of Korea. We understand where the book is set. Then they take their new names, and the way they do this is they take out a book of Japanese kanji, and every family member just points to a random letter, and that's the letter their new name begins with. So Sunhee takes Kyoko, and Taeyol takes Nobu. So going on to when they learn Japanese and their difficulty adjusting, they start learning Japanese. Taeyol does not really enjoy learning kanji, but soon he does. In the classroom, Sunhee has difficulty adjusting because she's struggling not to mess up her peers' new Japanese names with their old Korean names. When the United States enters the war, the family ends up hearing this on the radio when they hear about Pearl Harbor, and Taeyol begins thinking about the military and things like that. Moving on to Tomo's warning and their uncle disappearing. So Tomo, the friend of Sunhee and Taeyol, shows up when Sunhee is bringing dinner to her uncle. He speaks very vaguely and in such a way that Sunhee believes he knows that their uncle has been printing resistance papers, and he's like telling him to like get out since like he's doing a favor to the family. Soon he warns her uncle, and he essentially disappears and goes AWOL. They don't know where he is, since he thinks that they've caught on to him. However, we found out a few pages later that it's not that Tomo found out that Sunhee's uncle was printing resistance papers, but that Tomo was warning Sunhee that the military was going to come and take everything that was metal, so including like a printing press, in order that they could use these for the war to build, machine guns, stuff like that. Moving on to Taeyol's choice. As time passes, Taeyol becomes a part of the Japanese Youth Air Corps. Um, Their father promises Sunhee that he's going to teach her Hangul one day, which is the equivalent of kanji, but it's Korean. And then the family house ends up being searched due to their connection to their uncle, and Sunhee's diary gets burned. Eventually, Taeyeol gets confronted by the police about their missing uncle, and he comes to the realization that if he enters into the Japanese Imperial Army and leaves the country, they can't ask him about it, and he will not be tempted to sell their uncle out. So that's what he does. He enlists into the army, much due to the upset of his family. So with Taeyeol or now being a part of the army, he and the rest of the family get really good rations now that he's in the army. However, Taeyeol and the other Korean recruits are beaten often when they go through training. However, later on, Taeyeol volunteers for a mission, and when he writes home, Sunhee realizes that he has signed up to be a kamikaze pilot, which if you don't know what a kamikaze pilot is, I assume we all are, but I'll go through it. They were essentially pilots during World War II that were trained to fly planes. They were given just enough gas to get to their target, and they were essentially told to um, fly themselves into a target. They were usually American boats, and to cause as many casualties as possible, including themselves. So with the flight, Taeyeol learns how to fly this plane, how to fly the Japanese planes, and then Sunhee and her family receive his belongings, and they believe that Taeyeol is dead. However, and they all mourn essentially, and they're mourning for him. However, when the war ends, the family receives the news about the bombs on Japan and that it's all over. And the Japanese leave Korea, and they all go back to using their original Korean names. One day, Taeyeol returns, and the family is astonished that he's not dead, and he explains to them how his original plan was that he was going to take down another kamikaze plane rather than crash into the Americans. But on that day, the weather was too bad for them to hit their target, so all the planes flew back to base, and then they were thrown in prison since they failed their mission, and they were a bunch of Koreans in the eyes of the Japanese. But eventually they were released, and they were able to return home after many, many weeks. Finally, the book closes with Sunhee starting to teach Taeyeol the Korean alphabet, as her uncle had taught her. So that is pretty much the plot of When My Name is Keoko. Okay, so moving on to audience age level, a lot of the stuff I found on this mainly suggested grades 6 through 8. It's definitely easier that you could probably do 4th or 5th too. I even think that 8th grade is a little too easy for 8th grade. But I think it is a great book to pair in a World War II unit, since I feel like it gives such a different outlook on the whole thing. So moving on to intertextuality. Um, so we have Lost Names, Scenes from a Korean Boyhood by Richard E. Kim. I've actually read this one, and it is a great book. It is a similar story to When My Name Was Keoko. So I really liked that it was that World War II, but it also focused on the Japanese occupation of Korea, and it's a similar story. And then moving on, we have Lois Lowry's Number the Stars. Um, this is obviously a more Holocaust-centered book with World War II. So I liked that aspect of doing that side of that. And then there's So Far from the Bamboo Grove by Yoko Kawashima Watkins. And I thought this would pair really well. It's actually a flipped kind of thing. So whereas When My Name Was Kyoko focuses on a Korean outlook of the Japanese occupation, So Far from the Bamboo Grove is actually a Japanese outlook of the of the Japanese occupation of Korea. And it's set with the main character's father working as a Japanese official in Northern Korea, and it's in the last few years before the Japanese leave Korea. So I thought these three would work really well with the book due to their different aspects they all bring to the table. So for 3 interactive learning activities, I came up with Letters to Soldiers. So essentially, the idea was students writing to their own sibling who's been sent off to war and kind of talking about their situation back home and bringing back in issues like rationing and the overall outlook of people during the time. Um, and I thought it could be interesting if they did it from the perspective of being in America during World War II, or if they were in Korea, like Taeyol and Sunhee. So tying in aspects from the novel. And then we have cultural comparison. This is essentially like a Venn diagram to learn about and understand the differences and the similarities between Korean and Japanese culture, since the book also deals with some of the racism that occurs between them. And then we have the familial food change, which essentially was the idea I had of students bringing in a family recipe that from home and then taking out important aspects of the recipe that have to do with like the foods that were rationed and figuring out what they could replace with that to still keep the integrity of the recipe while understanding the effects of like wartime in homes. So lastly, I'm going to go through the big ideas and essential questions. Big ideas I really had were things like injustice and power when you're looking at the military police and just the overall Japanese being over the Koreans. And tying into that goes with the aspect of racism between the Japanese and the Koreans, which is very interesting to think about and learn about. Then the idea of sacrifice, that is a really big thing in the novel, what they give up to stay together as a family, to protect each other as a family, what their uncle gives up, and along with how Taeyol is willing to give up his life in order to protect his family and to stop bloodshed of people he doesn't think deserve it. And then lastly, more of a smaller one is gender roles. It's touched on briefly in the novel with how the men are always talking about the issues, but Sunhee and her mother are expected to not be in the room and be in discussion with them. So moving on to essential questions, I thought of a handful. Um, I'll go through them really quick, but so kind of dealing with what is the willingness of self-sacrifice tell about a person? What does the knowledge of Korean and Japanese cultures reveal about the racism between their citizens? Like how are they similar, how are they different? How do the lives of Sunhee and Taeyul tell about the difficulties of Koreans during the Japanese occupation? I think that one would work really well if you were reading another book like So Far from the Bamboo Grove. And then explain your own thoughts and feelings about what it would be like to give up your own name and be forced to take a new one. And lastly, like Sun Hee, why is it important to preserve family culture during times of stress and danger? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my book talk and learned a little bit about When My Name Was Keoko. It was a really great book, very in-depth and interesting, and a great outlook to think about when you are talking about World War II. So thank you so much.